It is a book about Subramanya Bharati and his idealism and his writing. But it's also, in a way, if you could call it, brings in the whole legal complications of ownership, of writing, of poetry. First, I'd like to say it's a great honor to be in conversation with Professor Venkatachalapathy.
It's an even greater honor to be in conversation with TMK.
I had the pleasure of reading your upcoming latest book, Who Owns That Song? An intriguing, captivating tale of Subramanya Bharati's writing and how it came to be owned by the people. And it was almost like reading a mystery novel for me. So I want to ask you, first of all, I'd like you to speak about Subramanya Bharati himself and his importance in Tamil culture, in nationalism, in the identity of India, and that will be a great way to start the conversation.
Subramanya Bharati is important for Tamil Nadu, is important for India, is important for the global citizen, but most importantly is important for the Tamil person, the Tamil individual. I don't think any modern Tamil subject can be without Bharati. Without Bharati, that person would be impoverished. Personally, I stepped into the world of letters during the centenary of Subramanya Bharati.
Okay.
Subramanya Bharati's centenary was unbelievable. It was a great cultural year where the entire people were involved. The state was sponsoring it, yes, but it was a big public event. There were meetings everywhere. I was a 15-year-old boy, so I was jumping from meeting to meeting. And his songs are truly inspirational.
Of course.
So I say somewhere in the book, if you want to start a journey, the best way is to pick a phrase from Bharati's poetry. You want to have a slogan for your magazine or for your movement, you pull out a line from this. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
And Bharati's life itself is a fascinating life. It is straight out of a work of fiction. The unsung hero, cultural hero, becomes a great star in Tamil culture. So he's fascinating. I was fascinated by his writing. I was fascinated by his idealism.
But this book is slightly different. I mean, it's not a book, it is a book about Subramanya Bharati and his idealism and his writing. But it's also, in a way, if you could call it, brings in the whole legal complications of ownership, of writing, of poetry. And to me that was fascinating. So you have on one side just incredible Tamil literature. And then you have all the squabbles of what could be called legal copyright writing and who owns it. This book does a fascinating thing. It makes the copyright story literature, which I think itself is a great achievement on your part. Why did this interest you? I mean, this is an unusual book. Usually when you write about poets, when you write about writing, you don't look at this aspect of their lives. And especially in the case of Bharati, it is post-Bharati that all this comes into being. So what interested you? How did you jump into this?
I've always been fascinated by the biographical form, especially people like us, who have grown in a post-colonial society which was ruled by Britain, not by any other colonial power. The British biographical form is a fascinating form, and I think as young people we all were fascinated by heroes. We are looking for heroes, but in the case of Bharati, but even though we are fascinated by biography, Indians are not great biographers. This is a point that Ramchandra makes all the time, and I think we are especially bad in writing biographies of poets. It is especially so in the case of Bharati, because Bharati's poetry simply doesn't travel well in English.
Yeah.
So my fear always is, when I talk about Bharati to a non-Tamil audience, I have to plead with them saying that, no, please don't judge him by his poetry in English translation.
Yes.
So that is a big challenge. So I always wanted to write a biography of Bharati, but I didn't want to write a biography of a poet where the poetry doesn't figure it. So this difficulty has always been there. But this particular book had a very different origin. I was always aware that Tamil Nadu was very unique. Unique in a very positive, not in a negative sense.
Yes.
Often you find in the national press negative stories about Tamil Nadu being a strange place where people burn themselves, they are mad about language, they adulate cinema stars. These kind of pop wisdom is peddled, and Tamils are made to look kind of very strange. Yeah, sometimes they are strange. For instance, this classic case is how Subramania Bharati's writings is in the public domain. Yeah. Ever since I was born, or even before I was born.
I just mentioned, in fact, until I read your book, this whole idea of Subramania Bharati's copyright as an issue had never even crossed my mind. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It struck me in 1991. So if you remember, that was the year that Tagore's copyright was supposed to have lapsed because of the peculiar political situation which I discussed. There was a minority government, US government in power at that time. Vishwa Bharati had a stranglehold over Tagore's copyright. You would have been very unhappy being a singer in Calcutta in the 90s, because if you chose to sing Tagore in a certain way, Vishwa Bharati would come after.
I know, yes.
And actually stop you from singing. Bharati, you are free to sing whatever way you want. This was made possible because there was a movement in Tamil, right from the late 40s, that the writings of a great cultural hero, who is our hero, his writings cannot be subject to the law of copyright.
Okay.
So, when I read this controversy about Tagore in 1991, I said, here we have a case where we have made it public.
Correct.
So this was always there in mind. I wrote about it occasionally. I wrote a piece in Economic Times when Anna's writings were similarly nationalized. So I said, there is a great story in this. I remembered the story. We are familiar with that story, and there is another dimension to it. One of the figures in this book is A.V.
Yes.
the movie Mughal. So the legend is that he, in a fit of generosity and magnanimity, gave up his copyright. But I remember the story in 1982 when the late Gnani died recently. He ran a journal called Deem Tight. In it, a left-leaning intellectual called Arandai Narayana basically ripped apart this story. The evidence, it was based on limited evidence, but nevertheless it was a thorough decimation of the claims of A.V. Venkatachalapathy.
This whole myth.
Yeah. I still distinctly remember, you remember in those days, you had the LP record.
Yes, of course.
The sleeve had Subramania Bharati and A.V. Meyyappan side by side. I mean, I'm a Democrat, I believe in egalitarianism, but Subramania Bharati cannot be equal.
That pushes the limits.
With a businessman. So I remembered all these stories. As a historian of modern Tamil Nadu, I've been reading about Bharati, finding new material, and the various figures who are involved in this story. Suddenly it strikes me now, speaking to you in 2018, that I knew Narana Duraikannan, the writer.
Yeah.
I met him on almost a weekly basis in the 1980s. He was in his late 70s. So the story about he was part of the negotiations that ultimately ended in the state takeover of copyright. And there was so much drama in the story. When he left his house in 1948-49, his young son was very unwell. When he had gone out on this big propaganda tour, mobilizing popular support to make Subramania Bharati's writings public. In those days there was no pagers, mobiles, nothing. His son had died. The news could not be communicated to him. He came back and found that the funeral was over. He didn't know the news. So this whole story, from the story of this poor man, Subramania Bharati, when he died, they said there are only 11 people in this funeral.
Yeah.
He didn't make any money out of his writings. Worse, his wife and children also didn't make any money. But within 10 years after his death, his writings became very popular. They became bestsellers. And you had a strange situation where the poet and the family did not get anything out of his writings. So this is the stuff of, you can say, fiction or history.
Exactly.
Sometimes history can be.
They collapse into one another. Absolutely. So I have just a couple of more things. Because being a musician, I have to ask you a musical question. So in the musical world, copyright is something that's not in our psyche at all. It's only in the case of, say, recordings. If you publish a CD or something, we think of this idea of copyright. I mean, of course, there's no question of copyright in terms of Tyagaraja Dikshitar, because one, it's 200 years old, and that, unlike the West, where there are systems by which some amount of royalty is given if you perform a certain piece of a composer for a ticketed concert, those systems are not there. So in a way, it's owned by everybody. Having said that, the case of Subramanya Bharati, or poets whose poetry has been tuned, in the sense they are not composers or music composers in the traditional sense, but their lyrics have been taken and sung. In the case of Subramanya Bharati, especially people like D.K. Pattamal and M.S. Subbulakshmi. Now, we've always sung these songs. We've always sung it in a concert. We've always sung it in public. We've sung it in ticketed concerts. I'm sure even during the whole copyright issue was happening, musicians other than D.K. Pattamal and M.S. Subbulakshmi were also singing it. But that didn't seem to affect this whole question. I don't think any musician was ever targeted, were they?
It never happened. It's very interesting, just to take the story a little backwards in time. I think Indian society has a certain attitude towards intellectual property. Everybody thinks that intellectual property is there.
Absolutely.
So nobody should be given claim and they cannot make any profit out of it. There are very minor exceptions. You remember the story of Sankarabaranam Narsayya,
of course,
who pitched his Sankarabaranam Raga.
Yes.
That is a story. But otherwise, the Indian tradition, Tamil cultural tradition, is to make profit out of art.
It's almost an evil. So,
but all the time, somebody else is exploiting.
Exactly.
That is one story. But in this particular case, I think it is only because the copyright issue came up only because of the broadcast rights.
Only because of the broadcast. Because of
when Subramanya Bharati died, I say in the beginning of the book, he would not have been familiar with the copyright.
Yes, copyright simple.
If his rights were violated, I am not sure, if James Cousins,
yes,
the Irish poet who was involved with the Theosophical movement, he translated his poetry into English. I don't think he took
permissions here. Absolutely.
Bharati was very proud of it. And throughout, even in his own lifetime, I have found some evidence that Bharati's songs were sung in public meetings.
Exactly.
It would have only made him happy. Through the 1920s, from the late 20s, Bharati's songs were sung all over in public meetings.
And I think also in different forms, from the Carnatic to folk tunes to different forms depending on the country. Street singers, exactly.
Street singers sang them, and we have evidence that and there was no